is our second annual Security Awareness Conference. If you don't know Curricula and myself, I'm Nick Santora, the founder of Curricula. We started this company in 2015, and our mission was to make security awareness fun for everyone. And the way we do that is through story-based narratives with heroes, villains, and stories that help teach employees how to defend themselves against the bad guys. So what is Curriculaville? So last year was a crazy year, and we gathered all of our friends and experts from around the world to help us talk about how to make security awareness better for everyone. Typically, security awareness is a side hustle for a CISO, an IT director, or anyone else on the InfoSec team to try to do their best. And why we put Curriculaville together was to take some thoughts, insights, ideas about security awareness and how we can make our employees more engaged and make our programs more effective. So today we're here to listen and learn from experts. Throughout this month, we're going to listen and learn from experts, and we're going to get some new ideas to share with the community. So what to expect and how to help. We have a lot of speakers this month, and every single Friday at 2 o'clock Eastern, we're going to be bringing our friends and partners on to talk to you. Everyone from insurance to our customer journeys to some best practices getting shared amongst how people have made their own security awareness programs better. So please, what you can do is share Curriculaville all month long throughout your community, your peers, your employees, everyone, to get them involved. And at the end of every session, we're going to be randomly selecting someone to give a little DD swag pack away with all kinds of fun little stuff. So make sure you tune in and check out all of the different conversations that we're having. So kicking off, how do we get everyone to become more cyber aware? That's what this week's theme is all about. And when you hear everything from Curricula, not only do we talk a lot about security awareness best practices, but we talk a lot about trust and we talk a lot about ethics. So much so that Curricula actually has its own code of ethics. Similar to how doctors follow a code of ethics, CPAs follow a code of ethics, we believe that every single person who's involved in security awareness in their organization should also follow a code of ethics of how to talk to their employees. We really believe that ethics matter a lot. So because of that, we invited our friend, Chris Painter, to talk about everything in between with people, personnel, ethics, trust, you name it. We're going to have a convo to just kind of see where it takes us. And I want to introduce Chris, who's our keynote fireside chat with one of the first people in the world who's federally prosecuted cyber criminals. He's heavily involved in the security community and served as one of the first cyber policy advisors at the White House. And he's just an interesting guy to hear from. So Chris, thanks for being here today.
Happy to be with you, with all of you.
All of us here in Curriculaville. So thank you for being here. So why don't we get started? Why don't you just kind of tell us about a little bit of your background? I know you were involved as attorney prosecuting cyber criminals, but tell us a little bit about that career, that journey you've had, and what led you to where you are today.
Yeah, well, I feel very fortunate in my career. I always had a passion and interest in technology and computers. My first computer was an Atari. My first home computer was an Atari 800. If people remember what that was, it kind of competed with the Apple IIe. My storage device was a cassette tape drive, so pretty old school back then. But I was just always fascinated by technology, and then, focused a little bit about that when I was in law school. I became a lawyer for the reason many people become lawyers. They don't know what else to do with their lives, and so I wanted to see what the various options were. I did some technology cases when I was a law firm, but really started focusing in this area when I became a federal prosecutor in Los Angeles and started focusing on cybercrime cases. And this is in the early 90s and through the 90s, and then after that, focused on a number of cases that I can talk about. That one of the early ones, and several really high-profile cases, including the case of Kevin Mitnick, the well-known hacker who hit hundreds of companies all over the world in a 2.5-year spree, and did it mostly. Frankly, his most effective tool was social engineering. He was just a good con man. He was just good at getting system admins to give up credentials so he can get into systems, and then he'd expand his access, or getting end users to give information. And he was very, very clever in the way he did this. And then he used hacking tools as well. Some of the first two stock manipulation cases using the internet, the kind of old wine in new bottles. A big denial of service attack case in 1999. We've had many of those since then, but this is one that impacted CNN and eBay and other sites around the world, and turned out to be a 14-year-old Kid with the moniker Mafia Boy. So a lot of really cool cases when, cyber really wasn't cool then. No one really cared about that much. We weren't as dependent on it. And that certainly has changed over those years. And I went from that to the mothership at Main Justice. So I was out in Los Angeles, came back to DC to Main Justice to help run the computer crime and intellectual property section. Among other things, ran the G8 high-tech crime group, so international work there, but also case stuff. Went from there to the FBI for a brief time, and then from there to the White House, the National Security Council, and helped stand up during the Obama administration a new part of the National Security Council that dealt with these issues and focused on cybersecurity and also cybercrime. And then from there, after a couple of years, I went to the State Department and was, I guess, the world's first cyber diplomat for over 6 years. So, pretty fun, interesting, challenging federal career. And then since then, I left back in 2017. So I've been doing lots of different things, including running an international cyber capacity building organization named the Global Forum on Cyber Expertise. So all fun stuff, but interesting. And I'd say I kind of fell into each of those jobs. And what I had was just a passion for the topic and really was helpful, happy to seize the opportunities that came down the pike.
It's a lot of stuff. We're going to soak that up here.
That's a long time.
No, it's
I've been doing it for like 32 years now, which seems, it is a long time, I guess. It seems like a long time. It is a long time.
It's an interesting journey too, between all the different kind of directions and types of organizations you've been involved with. So let's rewind to the beginning.
I'm a recovering lawyer now instead of an actual lawyer. I mean, I'm still a lawyer. You can never not be a lawyer, but once you start as a lawyer, but I'm more a recovering lawyer, more a policy guy.
And you mentioned a couple of things early on. You prosecuted some criminals back in the day. One of them that you mentioned that the perception in the industry today is that criminals are cool, right? When it comes to IT, for some reason, we look at criminals as idols. And, that's not good, right? In any other industry, but for some reason, IT folks decide to do that. Why do you think that is?
I really don't understand that. I mean, I kind of understood it back in the early years, when we did the sentencing for this one case, a small plane was flying around the courthouse with a Free Kevin banner, for instance, because people weren't as reliant, even companies weren't as reliant on these technologies. But now you would think that folks, particularly people in computer security, will know better, because the harm that is being caused by, hackers, malicious hackers, there are good hackers and malicious hackers, transnational criminal groups, nation states, and others has been significant. And it's not just been trade secrets of companies and their life's blood, but also personal information. And what we've seen with ransomware more recently, kind of disruptions of business processes that are even more serious, and extortion about the information they have. So it's hard to lionize these people, to say that computer criminals are somehow should be granted any kind of platform. And I think there is this myth sometimes that it takes a thief to catch a thief, that you need to have someone who's a computer criminal to help you do computer security, which is absolutely false. There are many people who don't have criminal convictions or are not criminals, who are really well trained, who understand computer networks, system administrators, cybersecurity, CISOs, who have gotten good training. There's lots of training activities that don't involve criminal activity, that have that intellectual curiosity, have that motivation you want. And if you start saying, well, the criminals are the ones you should turn to, that creates this weird incentive for people to want to become criminals. And that's absolutely a terrible career decision for several reasons. One, your future employment prospects are going to be limited. Most companies, even if they admire hackers, and I think a lot of them don't. So I would argue with your setup a little bit and saying I haven't seen that as much. A lot of these are publicly traded companies, and there's a risk in hiring someone who has a criminal conviction. Now, I believe in rehabilitation. I believe people can change their lives. So even if you committed a crime, you can become, better in the future. But if I'm a publicly traded company and I'm doing a risk analysis, I'm going to worry about someone's past. I'm not going to give them the keys to the kingdom to my systems if I can't trust them. Trust is really important. Maybe you let them do penetration testing, but even then you really have to control it. So, I remember I was at the big RSA security conference, which I've done for many years, but many years ago when I was a panel with one of the hackers I prosecuted. And the title of the panel was Foxes in the Hen House. Should you hire ex-hackers as security personnel? And of course, I said no. The hacker said yes. There was a defense attorney. There was another CISO there, or a CISO there. And the hacker said, well, it's like hiring a recovering addict to work in a methadone clinic. And I said, well, no, it's like hiring a current addict to be your pharmacist, because you don't know, you don't have that trust level, and trust is really important. And from the perspective of individuals who are looking at their own career path, you don't enhance your career path by doing illegal activity. You hurt it. You hurt it whether you're employed by the private sector or by the government, certainly by the government. And so, I think following an ethical path, following a path where you have all these opportunities to learn and understand without crossing that line is the way to go. And it will help you in your future. You don't need to go that dark side to understand how these things work. And to the extent there are people who still say, hey, it's great to be an illegal hacker, I just don't, I think that's just the wrong course. And especially these days when we see, malicious hackers going after healthcare during the pandemic, going after, companies that provide critical services, critical infrastructure, that's just not a tenable view anymore, in my view.
Yeah, no, it's a lot of things resonated there. For those that are attending Curriculaville in a few weeks, we're going to hear some of those stories of hired criminals that have caused quite a bit of damage and the things that have come with that. So definitely a strong point to make.
Well,
there.
and I also say that in another case, I'm not going to talk about the names of these various cases, but one person was, when they were on the run, acted as was the computer security person for a law firm, and it turned out that law firm had lots of problems afterwards. Big surprise, right? So you should think long and hard before you go down that path.
No, good advice. So from there, what was your role, in the White House, I guess, throughout your career, and kind of your involvement with government, and how do you think, in the past, what past experiences can help fix the future for government and security?
So it was interesting. When I came to the White House, it was a good time in the sense that President Barack Obama, when he was a candidate, his campaign had been hacked into. So he was, for president, really acutely aware of this issue. And one of the first things he did is he set up a small task force, which I was part of, to do a 60-day review of all of our cyber policies. And we engaged with the private sector, with civil society, academia, throughout the government in writing this thing, which we did in 60 days, and made a lot of recommendations. And I think that, we've been struggling with this for far longer than that. I remember, back when I was a prosecutor in the 90s, trying to get businesses to take this issue seriously, trying to make sure that they're reporting these issues to law enforcement in an appropriate way. These were always challenges. And we talk a lot about public-private partnerships, which is a great thing, but we use that term almost as a talisman. We don't have content behind that. What does it mean to have a public-private partnership? What are we exchanging with each other? So I saw a lot of good progress. It started, the focus on all this started to some extent at the Bush administration with something called the Comprehensive National Cyber Initiative, which wasn't completely comprehensive, but still a good start. And the Obama administration really amped it up in that and started trying to work with businesses. But, 10 years later, it's hard to believe it's 10 years later, but 10 years later, we do see a lot of the same problems we had before. We certainly don't see the kind of security we'd like to see, even among critical infrastructure companies. We don't see a lot of ordinary companies taking the precautions they need to do. It's better than it was, to be sure. People are more aware of it, to be sure, which is great. But we're still way behind the curve. There's still too many huge incidents, which we read about every day. I hate the term wake-up call. We get a big cyber incident, and they say, this is a wake-up call. And then we have another wake-up call 2 months later, and a third wake-up call a month after that. We've had lots of wake-up calls where we end up kind of just wandering in our sleep. And, I think some industries, financial services, for instance, has done a good job. Some other industries have done a good job. But a lot of companies out there, including small and medium-sized businesses, just haven't taken the kind of precautions they need to do and started treating this not as this technical, cybersecurity is technical, but not just treating it as a technical issue that they fob off on others to do, but understand this as a core risk management issue that's core to their business. if, one of the things I worked on in the White House and in the State Department was the Chinese theft of intellectual property that was happening in the US, Chinese sponsored. It was a huge issue. And these are trade secrets and proprietary information that are walking out the door. And so you may not see that loss until a couple years later when those products start competing with you. So there has to be a better translation layer to the heads of companies, to ministers and cabinet members and governments, so they understand what this issue is and not think of it as some sort of either magical issue or technical issue. And I think, over 10 years we made progress, but I see a lot of the same problems, the same arguments, the same issues about reporting, about taking precautions, about even basic cyber hygiene. One of the groups I'm involved in now is the Center for Internet Security, which preaches this idea of basic cyber hygiene. And the former Deputy Secretary of DHS, Jane Lute, but this was one of her hobby horses. Basic cyber hygiene would get rid of a vast majority of the attacks we see and intrusions we see. Now, there'll still be dedicated nation states who will get in, but we can focus on that if we get rid of all the noise by people actually just patching their systems and doing the things they should. So on the one hand, I'm more optimistic. We've made progress. On the other hand, I see the same things that I said before. I look at some documents we wrote back in 2011, and frankly, almost everything still applies now, and that's not a good thing, right?
Yeah. Yeah, it's when you see the colonial pipeline stuff and hear about. I mean, I spent 7+ years inside of critical infrastructure dealing with power grid cybersecurity compliance, and none of the stuff is new. And what it seems like is when we hear about an issue or breach and something that hits the news so big, at least from the public sector here, we look at kind of reactive measures to a lot of these issues versus, hey, how do we be proactive and create incentives for people to do the right thing before it becomes a problem?
Yeah, I think it's incentives. It's also understanding that this is something that's going to cost you in the future, even if you don't see those costs now. And the colonial pipelines one is very interesting because most people, and I know many people in the call are involved in the cybersecurity field, for years and years have been saying, look, this has to be a national level priority. This has to be something that we treat in the government as a national security issue, for companies as a core issue of their business. We just never made that leap. We got close to it. People focused on it. And when I said wake up calls before, people focus on it when a big event happens, and it kind of slides back into the ooze, in between. And so we don't get that sustained attention we need. And part I still think is that people don't understand it. You go to the C-suite, you go to senior government officials, and they still think it's this weird thing, and they don't completely grok it. But the interesting thing is, just overnight with colonial pipelines, when people had to wait in lines for gas, JB Foods, when they might not get their burger, or the Irish healthcare system where, impacted healthcare, or the DC police who were hit and their information was being leaked on criminal investigations. All of that, I thought, brought home pretty clearly that this was a national security issue. And literally overnight, the attention that this issue got, I think, transcended anything I've seen in the last 30 years. And I was involved in as a ransomware task force where we wrote a report the week before colonial pipelines happened. So good timing, I guess, on our part. And that got a lot of attention in terms of the recommendations we made. And, look, it's possible this will slide back into the ooze again. I'm thinking not. I think there's a change now that people really are taking this seriously. I think companies are looking at incentives, but I think there's also a lot of activity in Congress that might mandate certain reporting by critical infrastructure, might mandate standards for the first time. So this space, I think, is going to change pretty quickly right now. I think there's this unprecedented and far overdue focus on it. I think it's going to continue.
It's, you've been involved in this, you said 30 years, been involved in cybersecurity in this industry and working with all types of organizations and government. Being proactive is something that we all want to do, right? We all know we should be proactive, but we don't. And we see these trends happening not only in large enterprises and government, but all the way down to the small guys, the small businesses. What type of advice, wake-up call can we start giving to the small guys to start putting in some type of basic hygiene into their businesses?
I think the small, I feel sorry for the small, medium-sized businesses because they don't have large IT departments. They don't have a lot of resources. Sometimes, especially with pandemics, they're basically not making, they're basically making ends meet, if that. So I feel their pain. I understand this is not an easy issue. But the way you have to look at it is it's almost like paying rent. It's almost like all the other necessary costs you have out there. Because if you don't do this, it could really make your business, it could take your business completely out. We've seen ransomware cases where businesses, just cease to exist because they couldn't afford either to pay the ransom or they couldn't afford the disruption. Because even if you paid the ransom, doesn't mean the disruption ends right away or even at all. So the wiser course is to take the precautions, which don't cost that much, to make sure your systems are patched. You don't have to have an onboard CISO. It's great if you can and can afford it. You can also have managed service. You can have other companies doing this. There are a lot of opportunities out there. But it has to be something, as you look at all the priorities you have as a business, this is one of those required things that will help your business succeed in the long term. And I think it's just changing that mindset. Now, there are also lots of tools available for small and medium-sized businesses. And the Biden administration now is also focused on that too, how we get those tools out to people, how we can work with the non-critical infrastructure, but still critical in different ways. And so there, the resources like your guys, that people can turn to see what's available at a fairly low cost and sometimes free to them. And so it's more the mindset than it is the resources. It's having the mindset this is an important part of your business that you need to watch and be careful about, and do the same kind of risk management you do with every other part of your business. Treat it not as some wholly separate thing, but do the kind of same analysis you do when you're selling your product, when you're building your products, et cetera. I'm not pretending that's easy. I know that's hard. And there's a lot more the government can do to help with sharing information with small, medium-sized businesses. But number one is that awareness. Number one is that understanding that it's an issue. It's sort of like, if you don't understand it's an issue, you're not going to make any progress.
And I think that's kind of one of the things that we hear all the time is, big, small, in between, is how do we get people to care? How do we create that moment? And for any of the IT managers, CISOs, security administrators that are listening, what type of advice, suggestions can we give them to get people to care? But more importantly, how do we get their executive management to actually pay attention to this issue? Is it dollars and cents? Is it something else? How do we get them to kind of wake up to putting some proactive actions in place?
Yeah, I think there's a few things. One, there's this old phrase, never let a good crisis go to waste. And a lot of companies can do a lot to help themselves if they get hit by a malicious activity, if they have a plan in place before it happens, if they have an incident response plan. Now, it doesn't take a whole lot to deal with that. It's more organizational. It's making sure you know who to call, who in the business has authority, the lawyers, the CISOs, others. Having that plan in place is critically important. And the way you pitch it, I think, to senior management is first, look, in part, you play off this latest ransomware issue. It's one thing if information is being stolen from your company, you can maybe survive that. It's different if your entire operations are interrupted and your continuity of business is interrupted. So that's a big deal. That's something that C-suite people understand. They may not understand this idea of like cyber intrusions and cyber theft. They do understand that their company is brought to its knees for a week or more. So use that as a teaching moment. Use that as something saying, look, this is not some ethereal threat that you read about in the front page of the New York Times that happens to the government. It's all nation states like Russia, China, and others. This is criminal groups. These are others, and they're targeting you. They're going after our company. This is what they're going after it for money and other reasons. So that's one thing to do. The other is you really need translators. So, if you're the CISO of a company and you go in and start talking to the CEO in terms that you deal with every day, in terms of, number of intrusions, kind of attacks, what scanning things you're seeing, what things you're seeing on the system, they're going to tune you out. Their eyes are going to roll back into the back of their heads, and they're just going to say, I don't know what you're talking about. You go deal with it and leave me alone. So you need to think about the translation. What is it they care about? How can you make them understand it in terms that they normally deal with? So that's why I say go back to this idea of risk management. They understand risk management. That's what boards do. That's what management teams do. They look at what the risks are. They look what the opportunities are. They weigh them. They quantify them. You can do that with these risks too. So you have to put this in a way they understand it. A third thing I'd say is try to make it more real to them. Do things like tabletop exercises with them if they'll let you. Do things that are fun. So it's not. I don't know if tabletop exercises are fun. I find them kind of fun, but it involves them in it, and they understand. This helps you do the incident response plan too. They understand that they don't know who to call when something happens, or they don't know how to react when their data is not available. And that, getting them involved in that, I think, is helpful, and works and ends up working wonders, I think, for that. And then the last thing is more of the stick, which is more and more, and I mentioned this before, especially for public traded companies, the Securities and Exchange Commission, others are saying that you have to make disclosures about major cyber incidents. That's going to have an effect over time, and in terms of your company's value, in terms of its public facing, how it's viewed in the public, and even in terms of like securities markets. So that's something that boards need to be aware of more than they did before, and I think we're going to see more of that in the future. And you see stuff coming out of Europe, like the GDPR, the General Data Protection Directive, that has a number of things dealing with cyber. That if your company is breached and personal information is taken, you could be responsible, and you could be fined a hell of a lot of money. I mean, big money, big bucks, not just like a small fine. And so, a lot of companies, even the U.S., and certainly we have people from all over the world joining this call. Those kinds of, even though they're European regulations, they'll end up applying or having an effect on you. So think about that too. So part of the persuasion is the stick. Here's the bad things that can happen. Part of it is that, hey, let's think about this the way you think about other things, and let's do some tabletops so you understand how all this works. And you don't have to understand how to program a computer to understand what the risks are.
I really love the translator role. I think that's so undervalued in how to communicate needs and wants and requirements in a way that is understood by non-technical people. One of the best pieces of advice that we give quite often for those that are trying to make a change inside of their organizations is exactly that, is tell this in a narrative format. Use your business and use real examples of, you wake up in the morning, you drive to work, or you turn on your Zoom and get your coffee, however you get to work now, and this happens. Right now, this goes down, we lose this, all of our sales reps can't sell something, manufacturing stops, this happened, our vendors start calling, this happens, news starts calling us, what do we do? And those are the moments that enact the emotional response in us to say, yikes, as a board member or an executive, I don't know what we would do. And then that might instill some type of action to take place.
Well, board members are responsible. They have a fiduciary responsibility. Management does too. So, they're prepared for other risks. They're prepared for other things that can happen. They have to think about this too. And that those translators, I mean, they could be, if you have those skills as a CISO now, great. But one of the things about this field is you don't have to be a coder, you don't have to be a technical expert to be involved in this field. There are lots of people who can play that policy role, that translation role, that role of helping build that bridge. Some companies are more forward-leaning. They actually have the CISOs on the management team, reporting directly to the CEO. That's still relatively rare, I think. Some have cyber savvy people on the board because of a lot of the stuff that, the regulations, so this stuff's coming down the pike, but that's still the rarity too. So finding ways to translate it for that audience is a key thing. And I think over time, they're going to stop thinking about this as magic, right? I think they are. I mean, too often what happens now is if nothing is detected, the CISO is fine. As soon as something bad happens, the CISO is fired. And it can't be that binary. That's not the way to deal with this. It's not true in any other thing you do in business. Risks happen all the time. Bad things happen all the time. You deal with it. Obviously, if someone has completely been unprepared, that's different. But, it can't be a binary thing where the CISO is entirely responsible and the board and the management washes their hand of any responsibility or understanding of this.
So prepared translations is a good idea coming out of this. Prepare some translations, have a conversation, and see how the org responds, because the weight should not be on the CISO's shoulders solely to create the answers. It's the business to create the answers.
No, absolutely. And I think there's been a lot of efforts to do that, to try to get to try to make this more understandable. There's lots of materials out there to look at for that. But I think the number one thing is, the C-suite doesn't care about how many systems were impacted or exactly what the mechanism is. They might care about who the actor is, especially if it's a nation state or a criminal group, but they really care about what's being taken and how they value that. What is the cost, and what is the chance this is going to continue? And again, that's why I think ransomware is an opportunity, because that's so clear to them, when their business actually goes down, whereas other things haven't been as clear in the past.
Yeah. And we'll hear, for those listening in, we're going to talk with Tiago from Coalition about like real life insurance claims that are happening out there and get some real data behind this. But no one enjoys buying insurance. Like, it's not a thing that people just can't wait to do that. You're doing this stuff to look at all of the angles where you have risk that you can't alleviate on your own, and you're using insurance to offload some of that risk to a third party. In these situations, I think I was early in my career naive to this, is that why doesn't my organization care about security? We should be all caring about security. And they don't, right? Security is not the number one thing. It's not the reason they started their business or have a business. You have to protect that business, and security is kind of the candy shell that's helping us stay alive here.
Yeah, and this is true for not even cybersecurity, but for security generally. It is a cost center. It's not a profit center, unless you happen to be a cybersecurity business. It's not, it's not a profit center for organizations, and they don't like spending money. They don't like cost centers. It's not something that's not why they got into business. And there's this perception, I think, too often that people who do innovation, are trying to market products, think of cybersecurity, or really any security, as a drag on them. It's like, why should I care about that? That's keeping me from doing the things I want to do. Where the way I look at it is, cybersecurity is the road, and your business rides along that road. And if the road isn't there, your business falls into the abyss. You need that road actually gives you that stability, so that you don't have a major incident down the line that kind of interrupt or maybe even destroy your business. And you can produce the kind of innovative products you're doing, or even the more standard products you're doing, because that it's just taking that precaution. It's a foundational thing you need to do, and just deal with it. Understand you have to invest in this. Understand it's going to be a challenge like any other cost center in a business, but don't think of it as something that either you're never going to be hit by, because that's just simply not true, or that you don't understand and can ignore, because that's not true either.
Yeah, it's a new way to think about it. I think for any security professionals that are kind of listening to this, it's a way to help you translate some of your needs a little bit better. Is don't just think about it from, I need this for security. Think about the way that everyone else is thinking about security, and help alleviate their pain pressure on the investment is not made to be a security company. The investment's made to keep the business on the road.
Yeah, exactly.
You're not falling into the middle of the earth, or whatever the translation is. So another good topic that always comes up is careers in cybersecurity. And I know from my background, I was always interested in security, and I pursued a lot of things at a young age, but no one gave me a chance. And I kept trying to bust in the door, and I still never got that chance until, if you're familiar with Mark Weatherford, that worked for a few agencies, he gave me that chance, right? Back in NERC, he was the CSO, and he kind of recognized me as an up and comer and said, "Hey, I'll give this kid a chance." And I proved him right? And I'm very thankful for that today. And you hear stories like this all the time. What do we do to make more, give people more chances out there? What type of advice do we have for the industry on that?
So, as I said, there are a range of people you need, right? You need the technical people. You need the people who are involved, who have the training, who can actually be your frontline defenders. So that's the CISO and other people that work in that office. You need the translator people. You need the people who understand the policy and business dimension. So there's a pretty wide range for that. And when I tell people who are interested, I think there's lots of career opportunities now that really weren't there before, because, I think this is becoming more of a mainstream topic. So companies and government understands they need these people, both on the technical level and that translator policy level. I think the number one thing I always find is that, you're never going to know what you're going to end up getting. So you have to have a passion for this topic. You have to really care about this, thinking that this is something that is really important to you. and I think the career opportunities will come. Just be open to the different opportunities that are out there. And I do think as we go forward, and I have seen a change even the last 5 years where there's more opportunities for people. It used to be people just went into computer programming or product development. They weren't interested in security. Well, that's changed because people are now seeing there's opportunities. And cybersecurity is a very interesting field because it's very fast developing. There are new things happening all the time. It's kind of like a game, it's a cat and mouse game where you're fighting the intruders. And so, it's interesting in that standpoint. From that standpoint, it's international by default because that's where the attacks come from, or hackers route that through various countries. So my advice is that have that passion, be open to opportunities. I think the government and business now are trying to create more opportunities. They're working with educational institutions to create career paths for this, which weren't there before, and training for this. There are a number of schools who've done this for many years, Purdue and others, but now there are many other schools that are joining that field. So you can actually focus on this. You don't have to necessarily even go to a 4-year school. There are a lot of other opportunities out there. So I'm not saying that, well, there's been predictions, as there's been a lot of published things to say what the shortfall is in computer security professionals in the United States, and it's hundreds of thousands. If you export that into the world, it's even larger. It's like hundreds and hundreds of thousands of people who we need and we don't have, and so that's why the jobs are clearly there. So it's not. I think it's I think there's a lot of opportunities once you get in. Now, what those opportunities are going to be, that's going to shift over time and depending on what company or what country you're interested in.
Yeah, I think this topic comes up a lot where, people ask, how should I get into the fields? Like,
Yeah.
I don't know. Like, I don't know. What are you interested in? And I don't know. And it's kind of this back and forth. And I always look at it as, there's got to be a starting point for the future if we want to build a future in this field where, of course, you're not going to come out of college and be a cybersecurity expert. Like, we all get that. Yeah. But for some reason, we're trying to say, well, I need those people. I need experts only and no one less than that.
Well, and I think there are training opportunities, certainly in the government. There's a lot of things that are out there. DHS is hiring lots of people now to bolster its ranks. The Department of Defense, a lot of governments around the world are hiring more people. And just like in any other field, I was a prosecutor at one point. I didn't know anything about prosecution before I went to the government and started doing it. So there's learning on the job in these jobs. You can learn doing those jobs and move on. There are large companies that have big IT departments who can provide that kind of training on the job, and I think that's there too. So you might have to knock on a lot of doors, just like you had to. But I think those training opportunities are increasingly getting out there. And I do think with the programs that are being initiated in a number of universities around the country and around the world, that you can get enough training where people will hire you and you're going to have to learn more because you're never going to be an expert. You have to continually update yourself because the technology changes so quickly.
Yeah, and I look back at, a lot of my formal schooling was to learn how to be that translator. I think, I spent my own personal time learning all the technical stuff, but it was how to communicate that technical stuff that my formal university has really embedded into me till today. So if we're looking at kind of, I look at this problem as a kind of this macro level of how do we do this? How do we do this as a community? I kind of translate that almost like how sales environments get built up. Mm-hmm. Not everyone coming out of school is a senior salesperson with seasoned approaches. You kind of give them from a entry-level cold caller, a sales development person, and then they move up to a junior sales rep and then to a senior and blah, blah, blah. We got to build some type of mentality here in the security field to kind of do the same.
Yeah, not everyone starts as a brain surgeon. You might start as an orderly. You need to kind of move through the ranks. And as good as schooling can be, you're still not going to learn everything unless you actually are on the job and learning from other people who have been doing it longer than you. That's just that's true in many, many fields. It's not unique to this. But given the vast need for personnel in this area, I think those opportunities have to be open because otherwise we're shooting ourselves in the foot. We're basically saying, okay, we only want skilled personnel. Well, they're not skilled personnel, so we're not going to take anyone. That's crazy. So we have to get beyond that.
Yeah, that the brain surgeon. I need a brain surgeon right now. It's like, well, you didn't recruit and teach them over the past decade to
Yeah.
become a brain surgeon.
There are
So
not
if we
that
don't
many
make it
brain
natural,
surgeons around, so you're not gonna get one. So uh,
right? And so if we don't start making an action today to start warming up our new pipeline
yeah.
of personnel, then we're going to be in trouble in the next 5 years if we're not already now.
Yeah, well, I think we are already now, but there was it was an initiative that started more than 10 years, about 10 years ago, the National Initiative for Cyber Education, the NICE initiative. I didn't name it, and it's been working and doing that. It's been working with colleges and universities to kind of prepare this pipeline, working with companies to have places where people can intern and work. I think that's a great thing, but you have to really amp that up and do a lot more of that because, as I said, the needs is just growing and far outpace the number of people who can fill those jobs right now.
So what's a small, I mean, if you think of the big governments and large corporations, they're going to have this kind of pipeline. What does a small business do that has maybe, 10, 20, 30 employees? There's no dedicated IT or definitely no security expert.
Yeah.
What are they supposed to do?
Well, there's a lot of sort of best practices and things they can do just to do that basic hygiene. There's lots of things available that talk about those basic hygiene, like CISA, something called the controls, that if you just do those things, you get rid of 85%. Takes some technical expertise to be sure, but you can do some of that. The other thing is, there are managed service providers too who do that for you. So just like you might, if you're a small business, maybe you don't have your own accountant. You might have outsource your accounting or outsource your lawyer. You can do that with security to some extent, so you can look into those options too. Um, so there are ways for small businesses to deal with it, but I think just taking those precautions and making sure that you've locked down your system and patched it is one of the most important things. And that does require, look, it requires time, it requires effort, it requires someone to be responsible for that, either someone at the company or someone outside. And again, as I said earlier, I'm not pretending this is an easy thing for a small business where you have 10 employees and all they're doing is the work of the company. They probably don't have a full-time physical security guy either, or woman either. So, and you might outsource that too. And when you're outsourcing it, there are lots of opportunities to do that too. But then you have to use the same due diligence, the same research as you're doing with anything else. Picking people who can do a good job, who can do it for a fair price for you. It's like shopping for anything else that you need for your business. And I think as I said, there's lots of people out there, and picking the right one might not be all that easy, but it's something you need to prioritize.
And we've seen, mentioning managed service providers, we work with a lot of them, and passing the burden on doesn't mean you relieve the burden. And
well, that's right. Right. Doesn't mean it doesn't mean you wash your hands of it and don't do anything. You still need that board level understanding of the risk, because only you understand what the risk is to your business, right? You can't ask an outside third party to understand what the effects are going to be on your business. So you need that certainly, and I think you still need that general awareness too to be able to make those decisions.
Yeah, and then beyond all that, we're going to talk about, well, when all else fails, what do we do? Who pays the bill at the end of the day, or closes up shop at the end of the day?
And you also talked about insurance. I mean, look, don't think you could just get insurance and forget about all this too, because what's happened recently, insurance is relatively a new thing in this area. And a lot of the insurers are out there trying to get business, so their underwriting standards are still in development right now. But we're moving toward a different marketplace. I mean, particularly because insurers were getting sick of paying these huge ransomware payments. So I think a lot of the insurance market now is going to much more robust underwriting standards, where they're looking at what a company is doing to manage the risk. Are they patching their systems? Are they making sure they're following basic cyber hygiene? And if they are, then maybe they'll insure them. If they're not, maybe they won't insure them, or their premiums will be much higher. So, I don't think insurance is in any sense a panacea. It's an important thing, but don't think if you're a small business you can just insure and then get out of it and not think about it anymore. That's not gonna work.
The best way I've heard that translated is that we all have cars, and most, if not all of us, have car insurance. We don't get in our brand new car and drive it into a wall every single day. because
Well, right.
our insurance company would drop us at that
Our
point.
insurance company will drop us, and we have deductibles too. And just like that for for cyber insurance, it doesn't necessarily insure all the second and third order costs you have when you have a big cyber incident, when you lose customers, when your business is interrupted. And if it does, the deductibles may be pretty high at that point. So again, important part and part of the marketplace, but not the panacea, not the silver bullet.
So when we talk about that, the results or the outcomes of this stuff. So for organizations that are looking to get better, saying, all right, I get it. I got to get better at this stuff. How do we get people to kind of flip from a target of choice to a target of opportunity? So essentially, how do we get people to kind of stand out less in the crowd?
Yeah, I think, first, their organizations are going to be targets of choice no matter what. And those are going to be kind of high value targets. A lot of government businesses, government contractors, defense contractors, they're always going to be targets of choice for nation states and for others. But I think the interesting thing that we've seen, and I'll use ransomware again as an example, if you raise the work level that it takes for a hacker to get into your system, and you're not particularly, you're not particularly different than another company they're trying to do, like to extort, they're going to move on to someone who's easier. They don't need to spend their time dealing with a hard target when there's so many soft targets out there. So the number one thing you do to not be a target of opportunity is increase your protection, increase your, have policies like response plans in place, but just take those basic issues that you need to do to help with hygiene, so it's harder for them to get in, because there are too many targets out there, and it's a money-making game for them. For the criminals, they're out there saying, I want to make money, so I want the easiest target possible, and I want the maximum profit, and I'm going to move on. And if you make yourself an easy target, they'll take advantage of it.
I've heard that quite a bit, is the concept of be better than your neighbor. And as sad as that sounds, it's that try to do things that are going to make you look less attractive to a hacker.
Yeah.
And if you do that, and if everyone does that, we're lifting the bar together to make it difficult for them.
Well, and this is one of the debates, for a long time. As I mentioned, there's this debate about whether to report incidents to law enforcement. There's a misunderstanding, I think, that if you report to law enforcement, they're somehow going to make you the victim, victimize the victim. And my experience is that's not true. I mean, law enforcement I know of tries to work really collaboratively with the victims, doesn't try to make the situation work. And if they can go after and get the bad guys, that helps you in the future. Because look, if I'm a criminal and I hit you and I ask you for money, you give me the money. Great. I know there's a place I can get money from. So 3 months from now, I'll hit you again, or I'll ask my friends to hit you and I'll get more money. So not reporting these issues doesn't necessarily help you. Or another a situation, let's say, you have a major breach and you lose a lot of data. Now, you don't say anything about it because you're embarrassed. You don't want it to get out. And that works for a couple of years, and then it comes out, and then the embarrassment is even larger because it has a bigger impact that you covered it up for 2 years. So you really need to think through how you respond to the incident. That's part of that incident response plan I mentioned before.
All good stuff. So if you're hearing this stuff, I mean, the themes are repeating here. We're going to wrap up with one more question here, and it's basically, it's pretty clear that what's happening today, hackers are running a rampage on businesses left and right. And in order to get organizations to shift from, let's just throw a bunch of death by PowerPoints in front of our employees for our security awareness and hope that it gets them educated, how do we get people to recognize what they're doing is not the answer and to look towards something better?
Yeah, I hate PowerPoints. I used to use PowerPoints, and now to the extent I ever use PowerPoints, so PowerPoints with like 1 or 2 pictures on them, and don't go beyond that. Like usually movie pictures where hackers or computers are the main characters. I like cyber movies, for instance. So, I think we have to move away from that, because if it's so dry that it's just a chore for people to go through, and they basically check the box. Okay, I watched the PowerPoint. I answered a couple questions. I'm done for a year. I'll deal with you telling me to change my password every few months, and that's it. They don't have any ownership in it. They don't have any understanding of why this is important. So they're not going to take the precautions that they need to do when they get a spear phishing email that's targeted and that they don't really do the due diligence to look at first, and it could end up infecting the entire company system. So you want to have things that are more interactive. There's been lots of things tried in the past. Some of them are a little edgy, like a friend of mine who used to run the New York State cybersecurity operation and then ran what was called the multi-state ISAC, information sharing organization, would do essentially tests where he'd send emails to people in the government and see if they bid on them. They were fake emails and see if they did. And if they did, he'd explain, okay, here's why this was fake. Here's what you should have been looking out for. Now, he did that to the governor of New York, too. He just didn't do it with like low-level employees. And at first, I think the executives were a little annoyed this is happening. But over time, they're like, okay, I understand this. This is a good way to kind of get people sensitized to it. So you can do things like that. You can have people, I mentioned tabletops earlier, have them participate in things like that. You can do interactive sessions. There are, I'm sure you guys have interactive sessions where you can go through that are not the death by PowerPoint. I mean, no one, maybe at one time in life, no one absorbs information from a PowerPoint. It's just, one of the reasons I stopped using PowerPoint is that people would just read the PowerPoint slides and not listen to anything you're saying. And then there was no retention afterwards. So please try to use innovative ways to get to people. You might not reach everyone that's just the way it is. But if you make it something they maybe not enjoy doing, but at least is interesting to them, they're going to retain a lot more of it and they're going to care about it more. And another way to do it is make it personal for them. I mean, you're obviously talking about the company's assets, the company's systems, but talk about how they too could be victimized, how this could actually affect their daily lives, how, their personal information might be at risk and how things can go after them. I think in the government, people, some of the training stuff that I've seen has sort of moved toward that as well. So people think about it, not just in terms of their government job, but also in terms of their individual lives. I think that's very helpful. How it might affect their family, their kids, and other people who are getting targeted. There's lots of ways to do this, but try to make it as fun as possible, I guess I would say, as entertaining as possible, because interestingly, that's what people retain.
You heard it here, folks. Make it fun, make it unique, make it relatable. If we do that, we can shift the needle together. So let's go through, thanks for all of this conversation, Chris. It's been awesome. Let's go through some questions from the audience. I know we have a few minutes left here. This one is, education's key. Are you seeing elementary and secondary schools increase their roles in the education of our youth?
Yes and no. So some are. So, part of, there's been a lot of cyber education initiatives, as I mentioned before. And part of that was trying to break through and do it not just at the college level, but along the way. So this is ingrained in you. So you don't think of this as some crazy different issue. You look, kids in elementary school now use computers all the time. It's part of their lives. I remember there was a big cyber summit that was done. The UK did a few years ago, and they had a separate youth summit. They called it Youth Cyber Summit, and the spokesperson that the youth people elected came and spoke at the big summit and said, "I don't know why you old people keep talking about cyberspace. It's our everyday world." And it is the everyday world for these folks. And especially with the pandemic where everyone's doing online learning online instead of being at school, I think that's been made even clearer. So I think it's important, especially in this online environment, to try to teach some of those skills and teach that suspiciousness, I want to say, at least, to appraise what you're seeing and be cautious, just like we do in other areas. And look, children are targeted, not just for the kinds of things we're targeted for too, but there's a lot of malicious actors who are going after children, and that's just unacceptable. So we need to treat, I'd say two things we need to do. One, that wariness, that understanding of security at that level, but also ethics. I think it's important to ingrain ethics in as you're growing up. So just like it is, a kid would not think about breaking into his neighbor's house. And they might think, well, it's okay to do it by computer because I'm not there, they're not seeing me, it's a whole different thing. We got to change it so that people understand why this is a bad thing, how this is hurting people, make that part of the ethical environment too. So I do think it's important, and I do think it's happening. When I say yes and no, I say that because not uniformly. So a lot of different school systems are trying to do this, others are not. Look, I have tremendous respect for teachers and the job they do and the constraints they're under, so I understand that. But I think this is something we have to sort of add to the curriculum in a modern world.
Yeah, it's funny. couple months ago, someone was talking about how early do we get kids involved in 2FA? And it's a something that confuses us today. It's like, well, then how's it going to work? Which services are going to use? Just these technologies that we're going to have in the future are here to help protect us.
Yeah.
And our kids and the future generations are going to be doing things that are difficult to do today for us that are going to be normal to do in the future. But I thought that was a unique way of thinking about it, is that how do we protect the kids and get them involved ethically and in the right direction at the youngest age we can.
Yeah, we need to make it accessible to everyone, to the kids, and I think they are, as I said, using the technology. So we should also talk to them about the risks of the technology, not scare them, but talk to them about the risks of technology. We talked. I remember when I was back in the White House, we talked about how do you translate this to make it more accessible to other people. And it was interesting. Barack Obama used to do these weekly fireside chats, right? He wasn't the first person to do them, but and we got him during National Cybersecurity Awareness Month, October. We convinced him to do a fireside chat on cybersecurity, which was great. And so I remember we wrote a little script to him. He did his own talk though, sitting in the room with him as he was doing this. And it was just fascinating. This is online somewhere. You can see the president of the United States telling people to patch their system and use firewalls. It was really amazing at the time. And then we thought, well, that's great. But how do we mainstream it even further? Can you have a Smokey the Bear for cyberspace? Smokey the Bear, everyone understands, fire security and dealing with forest fires because of Smokey the Bear and that campaign. Can you do something similar for cyber? We haven't hit on it yet. Maybe DD is I guess DD is the thing, but we need to do that to make this mainstream for people. We're not going to do it through television shows. A lot of the television shows on this are really terrible. CSIS cyber, or CIS cyber, I don't recommend, for instance. But make this more of a mainstream topic and not this boutique topic.
So what are your, we talked a little bit about kind of being more proactive versus reactive, and what are your thoughts on some of these compliance regulations? We got CMMC for DoD, we have SOC 2 for startups that are going through this, that are kind of making people be proactive, but might not be answering the question we're trying to solve.
Yeah, I mean, I think this has always been a challenge when the government's mandated things in the past, especially for government agencies. They've been checklists, and checklists are not really effective, right? They have to be things where you're actually targeting this in terms of the environment you're in. And so, things like SOC 2, I think, are very helpful. I think some of the other things that are out there are very helpful. The controls I mentioned, the CIS controls, are built to be policies you adopt that help you. And so there are lots of sub policies within that. So I think there are ways to actually do some of the measurement here. There's also incentives the government can do. I think one of the most interesting things about one of the executive orders that was issued by President Biden was this idea of a software bill of materials, where the government said, we're going to require certain standards for things we buy. Now, the US government is a freaking giant purchaser of stuff, right? So if they say they're going to have standards and companies are selling to them, the companies are not going to create two versions, one for the federal government and one for other people. So that raises the bar in terms of software security. That's good. So I do think some of these tools are helpful, but it can't be simply a check the box and static thing and say, okay, we're all done, and we'll look at it again in a year or 6 months. I mean, it has to be continuously looking at your system, looking at the threats, and some of those threats are going to be people threats too. You have insider threats and other threats. They're not just all external cyber threats.
So another question came in, and it's more specific on, they're looking for a managed service provider, someone that can help them with security, things like that. But how do we know who's trustworthy? And let's expand that question a little more of, let's look at all products and services out there, including security companies involved. How do we know that they're trustworthy? How do we get some insight on that trustworthiness, and who do we interact with to do that?
Yeah, I mean, look, this is a tough question. It's not unique to cyberspace too. I mean, how do you know you can trust a plumber, for instance? How do you know you can trust an electrician? I think that you need to, really do a little bit of the background research, talk to other clients of that company to see if they're happy with what they're seeing. Look at look at the reviews, look at, publicly facing things that are out there. it's do that kind of due diligence. So there's, it's going to be a case by case basis. You're going to see the companies that get high marks, get a lot of business. That's great. If a company is telling you that they have the silver bullet for anything, probably stay away from that. I don't think anyone has. I don't think anyone has figured that out yet. But there are lots of good companies out there who are putting together these tools. And I think there's a lot of innovation out there. So it's really doing that due diligence. And the CISO certainly could do that, but I think the management team can do that as well.
And last year we talked about this topic a little bit, is that trust your community. So we're not talking about Reddit or the internet. We're talking about having a conversation with a real person, with real words and real experiences.
Yeah, especially, and if you're talking about like a managed service company, if you talk to other clients of that company, they're probably the ones, they've seen it firsthand. So they know, okay, this has been effective. They've done good stuff for us. They have good feedback for us. I mean, those kind of reviews, it's Yelp, but in person. So,
yeah.
And I think that's really, really very helpful too. And then look at the products they're offering. What are they offering to do for you? Are they following some of the things I mentioned? The CIS controls. Someone else in the chat talked about NIST. Various NIST controls for critical infrastructure and frameworks that they're putting together. And NIST is working on a framework now for ransomware, for instance. So, look to see if they're following those kind of generally accepted standards, and how they're dealing with your data, where they're storing your data, what kind of access there is to your data from the outside. All those things are kind of critical, just risk management issues.
Awesome. Well, we are out of time, Chris, but I thank you for spending the time with us here in Curriculaville to kick us off this month. For everyone else that has joined in, I know there's been a lot of questions. We're going to cover some of these questions and a lot more all month long. So tune in every single Friday in October, 2 p.m. Eastern. Thank you for joining us. There will be a recap sent out to everyone that wasn't able to make this session, but thank you again and hope to see you in Curriculaville the rest of this month.
And happy Cybersecurity Month to everyone.
Thank you, Chris. Thank you, everyone, and we will see you soon.